Hi, and welcome to the Spark session, The Stories We Tell. This is how we look at the stories we tell ourselves and how they impact our emotional direction. So we've always told stories. It's what we do as humans. It's how we learn. It's how we teach. It's how we share our histories. And most important, it's how we form our ideas of how the world works. So, in other words, child plus puppy equals fun. So I now have an association or a story that tells me how the world works. Unfortunately, with ADHD, we end up carrying a lot of very negative stories that aren't particularly helpful and aren't really representative of how the world works. So today, I want to talk to you about the importance of the stories we tell, ourselves and others. I want to talk about how they shape our emotional world and what you can do to make your stories work better for you. For yourself, for your relationships, and in the workplace. So first, let's talk a little bit about this idea of emotional direction. Now, there's lots of stuff out there on emotions and ADHD. We've been talking about it for about the last 8 to 10 years. We're still learning about it, though. However, some great resources for this are, if you want to look at work by Barkley or Brown, there's others out there, Rostain, that all write great material on emotions and ADHD. I also have a longer presentation that's available, and I'll put a link to it in the notes for you. It's worthwhile looking at it and really understanding how emotional self-regulation happens for people with ADHD. So, but as a brief reminder, here today, we have a trigger. So I see a red car, I see, smell, hear, feel something. And I make an association. In other words, I have a story in mind about that thing. So for me, red cars are fast. That's the association I have, right? What happens then is, it goes towards my attention. I hand off from my default mode to my task positive network, which is my attention firing up. And the reason I've got that increased energy there is that we require increased available energy. And in this respect, we're talking about dopamine availability in the prefrontal cortex. Now, we have dopamine right through our brain, in fact, right through our nervous system, and we have heaps of it there. The problem is we're not able to access it reliably in that frontal part of our brain. So which means that what's supposed to happen is when the attention turns on, it turns down the emotions or the default mode network, and it allows us to see objectively just the information relevant to that red car. So now I'm looking at the red car and I notice it's a bit beat up and it's sort of puttering up the hill and not doing very well. And I think, oh, hang on, maybe my story's wrong. Maybe I need to understand that not all red cars are fast. Therefore, I hand back a new story, a new association, and now I know that not all red cars are fast. Okay. Now, with ADHD, we have a little problem here because we don't have reliable availability of that energy or dopamine availability in our prefrontal cortex that allows us to activate that attention. So in other words, we remain more reliant on the reactive stored story, the association story. Now, the problem with that means that not only do we tend to be very emotionally reactive, which is what people see and what they're talking about when they say, oh, you're very reactive or you're very emotional. What they're saying is, I'm hearing raw emotion hearing that you've processed the information. So as a result, that causes problems for us. Now, the other thing that will happen with this reactive feature is we're not retraining ourselves. We're not changing our internal messages. If I failed at something, then my expectation is I probably will fail at this too. You know, that's the idea. And we've often heard those negative messages right from childhood. And it wasn't that our parents were terrible as a rule. It's just that they were trying to help us in a neurotypical way and not aware that they were imprinting these ideas on our head. They expected we would solve our performance problem. Now, that's a problem with ADHD. Until you really understand your ADHD, it's very difficult to do that. So we end up being trapped by these reactive stories. So let's take that association and reframe it as stories that we're going to tell ourselves. And let's think there's the negative stories we have with ADHD. And there's a lot of them. And it's interesting if you think back and hear those voices in your head, hear that story in your head, particularly the negative ones. Who do you associate with? Whose voice are you hearing it in? It's always worth paying attention to. Now, we could spend forever digging back into every time someone told us something negative, but really that's not going to be the solution. The solution moving forwards is about how do I transform that into a positive, helpful message. Now, it's not about deluding ourselves and saying, oh, we're wonderful and we can do anything. It's about saying, assessing, is that message true? Is it still true now? And is it something I can do something about and change? In other words, we need our coach. So our coach is there. Our coach has our back. He or she is going to remind us of our attributes and our positive features. Remind us that what happened in the past doesn't necessarily have to happen again. We can change it. And most importantly, if we understand our ADHD, then that coach can be an amazing power for change. So let's get you. Well, I want you to think about one of your negative stories and what it would mean to change it. I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. I hope you felt a great relief at the idea of relinquishing or dropping those negative self-stories. Second thing I want to talk about in terms of these stories is the feedback effect, or the ripple effect, I like to call it. Now, Russell Barkley has done a lot more work on this and so eloquently refers to it as the extended phenotype model. And I'd strongly encourage you having a look at his recent article from February 2022 about ADHD as an extended phenotype model. It's incredibly powerful. So we're going to talk about that in more simplistic terms today. It's a bit like sonar. So my limited understanding of sonar is that we send out sound waves, they bounce off things and come back and tell us if there's something there. Now, with ADHD, we've got to be aware that our actions impact on our world. So in other words, what we do has an impact on the people around us, some more than others, but generally it has an impact that goes out. And these people will see that, process it, and decide how they're going to respond to us. The interesting part is how it comes back to us. Some will have no impact at all in terms of response to us. Others will have different levels of response. And particularly, partners or loved ones are going to have a huge amount of impact on us. Now, bundled with that is that with ADHD, we're very externally focused. We're very responsive to this external feedback. Now, it probably comes back to this idea of that we're being reactive still. We're not stopping and processing and contextualizing this feedback. We're just taking it raw and saying, oh, that is real and that's what's happening right now. Now, the opportunity, though, that lies here is, yes, we could get better at processing it. The other thing, too, is that we could also start to shape how we want to get feedback from others. So, in other words, if we can shape it to our needs, so if I can tell those around me, particularly my significant other, what effect different types of feedback will have on me, it can help them shape their responses, which means they're going to get better results out of me. But also, too, more importantly, I think it brings my attention to, oh, hang on, I'm hearing that sort of feedback. That's not going to work for me. This is how you could inform me better about that. So I want you to take a minute and think about someone's feedback that has not been helpful and how. Okay, welcome back. Hope I didn't traumatize you with that memory. But I hope it made you aware that the feedback from others is incredibly powerful, particularly if you have ADHD. So let's change this script. I want you to think about, and I'm going to help you show how you can change the way you represent yourself, both for yourself, your partner, and for your work colleagues. I want you to be thinking about what is my new story going to be for each of those situations, because they all should be a little bit different. Because remember, well, you need to know you the best. Your partner sees you in the context of what you do, so they know you well. They don't necessarily know what you do well. Your work colleagues see you in the context of work first, so they know what your work is very well, but they don't necessarily know you very well. And particularly, they're likely not to know your experience with ADHD very well. So we have to create different scripts depending on who we're talking to. So let's start off with some really good rules to shape these scripts. And these are mine. By all means, develop your own, but I think these are a great starting point. Define me by my intent, not just the outcome of my actions. Okay. Normally people speak to the actions, what happened. Okay. What I want you to be aware is that with ADHD, my actions don't always meet my intent. Probably a little bit more often than the average person. They don't meet. So please start with, he meant well. Good intention should be the assumption. The actions we can fix and change. Don't always assume it's ADHD. There's got to be a really cool message here. I am not my ADHD. It is a diagnosis. It describes a very narrow aspect of my existence. It has an effect across my whole existence, but it's not defining who I am. So it's really important that we tell people this, or make sure that it's a key part of our story, because it's very reductive to assume that everything that goes wrong is about ADHD and that everything goes right is not. I will define my symptoms. By all means, tell me where you have a problem. Tell me about the impact on you, but you let me manage my symptoms. Be open to other explanations. So, I hate to break it to you, but sometimes it's not all about you. We are not the center of the universe. I don't think you are, by the way. But we need to keep reminding ourselves of that. Sometimes the other people are the ones that are struggling at this point in time. So, if we're okay, we're okay. Most importantly, I own my performance, on target or not. I remember, we've had lots of conversations about shame and blame with ADHD. I don't believe in shame and blame. I think they're useless emotions. What I do believe, though, is in owning it. And as a gift to you today, one of the greatest freedoms I have ever found is the day I was able to concede publicly that, hey, I could be wrong. I used to tell myself I could be wrong all the time, but the ability to stop and say, yeah, I think I screwed that up, was liberating. Because not only did it mean that I didn't get caught in this shame and blame stuff, I just owned it. But on top of that, it meant that it was now out there so I could fix it. I could reinforce my intention was good and I could figure out how to fix it. And in that tone, remember, we're capable of solving anything. Now, I can't remember who quoted this, but it was basically the idea about leverage. Give me a lever that's large enough and I will shift the world. I have ADHD. Give me the right information, the access to the right tools, and enough time, and I will figure out anything, including my ADHD. All I have to do is remember that I need to give it my full attention. So let's take those rules and let's build the stories that will serve me. Start with I could. Possibilities, not foregone conclusions. Add in your positive supercharged. So in other words, what's the stuff that works well for me out of my supercharged? Reflect on your achievements. I encourage people, part of the power of using a diary or a planner is that we're able to see what we've done. It's important that we reflect because we forget. Add in your problem-solving skills. So like we mentioned earlier, that yeah, we can solve problems, but think about how you solve problems. So when you get in that tight corner, what you would do. And that includes asking for help. Now let's think about the script we want to build for our relationships. How to accept / expect me. So what we want to do is again, and I'm hitting this one again, I know, but it's important. We want to be defined by our intent, not just the outcome of our actions. Often our partners will assume negative intent because they see continued failure to follow what they've worked through with you in terms of actions. We need to keep coming back to that. It also helps us be free to figure out where our actions have been problematic and to acknowledge the impact on our partners. We need clarity of ownership. So yeah, I'll own those actions. I'm going to own the solution too. I might be open to getting help from you with it, but basically this is my thing to drive. I want you to know what helps my supercharged features. So verbal processing is my way of working through things. I need you to know that that's what I need to do. Don't jump in and solve it for me. Let's build in some balance recognition. Let's make sure we notice what is working alongside what is problematic. And let's build in recognition of us both being adults. So back to the thing of I will own my thing. I'll also recognize as an adult, you don't want to have to parent or direct me or solve things for me. So let's keep reinforcing that idea in our stories to each other. Okay, now we're in the workplace, and I know that Cam, Alan, and Madeline have been talking about workplace particularly, and there's lots of great tips for how to shape your performance in the workplace, but let's talk about the stories. So how to get the best from me is a great place to start, rather than this is my problem or this is my barrier. This is how I work best. We're applying the promoting of the positive supercharged stuff. We're going to protect the negative supercharge too, though, by using tips like, if you want, best way of getting me to do that is pop me an email or write me a note, or let's set milestone measures that we can check in on ourselves. Let's remember that whether we share we have ADHD or not is optional in there. Their main connection with you, as I said earlier, is the workplace, not your work, not who you are. Ideally, we want to know who we are. And it's certainly fine to talk about your diagnosis if you're comfortable to do that. But be aware, they may not have the same understanding of ADHD as you do. And remember, ADHD is not a description of who you are. It's just part of how you function. So be aware that in sharing, you can choose what to share, and instead you may choose to share just what works for you. However, if you want to, you can share ADHD, but just be aware that you need to help them understand. And finally, how feedback works for me. So, in other words, how to get the best out of me in terms of feedback. Last but not least, live your brand. So be self-aware, check in on those stories and make sure that you're reapplying them wherever you are. Notice the ripple effect. Notice that that the feedback on you and what you need to adapt in relation to that rather than reacting. And be reliable. Live your brand for others to believe it. We can say we're going to own this till the cows come home, but if we don't step up and accept the error of an action and take ownership of it, then they're not going to believe whatever we tell them, and they're not going to respond with us in the way we want them to. So, I want you to go and spend time with each other and your lovely facilitators now. There's a handout you're going to find in there, which is a little prompt you can print out and stick on your fridge if you want, about how to work through your stories. But for now, have a look at your workbook, talk to your facilitators and each other, and spark off and figure out what you want your stories to be. Thanks very much.